I'm Richard from Drive Green, and today on this sunny afternoon we're going to be having a little bit of a walk around a Nissan Leaf and going through all the basic functions we'd normally go through on a forecourt handover. First things first, we'll run through the very basics. We'll start with simply turning the car on. In order to turn the car on and to move into gear, be it forward or reverse for the first time, you'll always need your foot on the foot brake. Obviously the car wants to know you're in control of the car before it will turn on or do anything. So with your foot on the foot brake, the power button is just here on the centre of the car. Press the button, you'll hear it bing bong to life. We know the car is on because a green car symbol will be displayed on the centre console. If that green car symbol isn't displayed, it means we've turned on the car but haven't had our foot on the foot brake. The car is now on. It's in park as is shown on the dash there and is shown by the orange light displayed there, so the car isn't going to go anywhere even if we take the handbrake off. What I'll do now is I'll show you where the handbrake is just to get that out of the way, because that can be kind of fussy, because as you'll see the handbrake isn't in the usual place. In a Nissan Leaf you've got a foot handbrake. So at the top left of the footwell there's a little pedal in the floor. If you give it a press you'll hear it click, you then lift off and the handbrake comes off, and obviously the handbrake symbol moves from on the dash. Obviously to reapply the handbrake you just push that down. That handbrake you tend to use just in parking. I don't think many people really tend to use it in normal driving as such, so that's something you just need to worry about before you get going. So the car's on, the handbrake's off, however the car is in park. The motor isn't engaged, so the car won't actually go anywhere. So the next stage is to move the car into gear. As I mentioned before, unless your foot's on the foot brake, it's not going to move into gear. So we'll put your foot back on the foot brake, and to move it into drive, you push the little mouse across towards you and back, and the light moves from the P down to where it says D and B here, and you'll notice that a D is displayed on the dash there. You'll notice it says D and B here. The car actually has two different drive settings. So if I do that same motion that I did to move into drive, but I do it a second time, that D will then change to a B on the dashboard. That puts the Nissan Leaf in its second driving mode. You've got the D mode, which is a standard drive mode, which the car drives very much like a normal car. You know, it'll coast, you'll use the accelerating brake just like you would normally. However, in the B mode, which stands for braking, the car automatically does what's known as regeneratively brake for you. Some charge will go back in the battery, some charge will disappear. However, if you're in the B mode and you just lift your foot off the accelerator, the car will slow at the rate at which it's putting everything back in the battery. So none of that regenerative charge, if you like, is wasted. All the controls are just like any car really. So you've got indicators, wipers, all the usual things. Everything else is kind of new car stuff. There is a manual in the glove box for all our cars, and obviously we're always on hand to help with anything you want to know. But I think most people will prefer to press some buttons and find their way around as they go. There is, however, a couple of buttons that I'd like to show on the centre console, which I think are perhaps relevant. But you've got this button here, which is your zero emissions button. In there's where the slightly different things you wouldn't expect to find are. You've got your charging timer and your climate control timer, basically. Climate control timer is what you would program in to, particularly in winter, if you like, to get the car to warm itself up before you get in. So in there you'll program in your typical daily departure time, and then as long as the car's plugged in, it'll heat itself up in the morning before you leave, defrosting if it needs defrosting. You've got the charging timer. Say for example you have economy 7 or the equivalent sort of cheap overnight rate through a smart tariff. You will program into the car here to let it know when you want it to charge. So you'd set the timer to run for whatever is your reduced rate charging time. There is a button over this side as well to override that. So if you happen to have a charging schedule timed in, and for some reason you're charging in a public car park, or it's the weekend, you want to charge in the middle of the day, just press the button and it'll override that charging timer. There's a few things on this screen. You've got battery temperature, which it is largely irrelevant, although with multiple charging on a hot day it can increase. You've got the run of dots along the top of the screen, which is a bit like a rev counter. As power goes out the battery, the dots go around to the right in white. As power goes back in, you get these turquoise dots that go around to the left. But the key thing is on the right hand side, you've got your range predictor. This shows how full the battery is, and it gives its estimate, if you like, of how far you'll go based on the amount of charge it's got in there. This figure calibrates as you're driving. So treat it as a guesstimate, and as you get used to the car and your driving style, the terrain you drive it over, you'll become more accustomed to what your car will do with how you drive it. This particular car is a 30 kilowatt Nissan Leaf, which I would normally have as approximately 100-mile range vehicle. And interestingly enough, this one was reading 94 miles of range with 93% of charge. Don't be alarmed, certainly if you jump in the car and you go off an angry drive, or you're going on the motorway and you think your range is disappearing alarmingly fast. Don't. It's just recalibrating and assuming that if you drive at that speed, this is how far you'll get out of the battery. Another interesting quirk of the Leaf and its range prediction, which can be, I guess, a little bit unsettling on your first long drive, when the car's fully charged, it can't regeneratively brake. So when you're in the B mode, it doesn't actually do anything. It still drives like the D mode because it's still putting in the most it can back into the battery, but because the battery's full, it's got nowhere to put its charge in. So it takes normally about sort of 15% of the battery to discharge before you start really noticing the B mode doing its thing. Okay, so moving on to the cluster of buttons we've got just to the right of the steering wheel. We've got this little cluster of buttons up here, which is to do trip resetting. However, the one with the squares in, changes the screen on the dash here. There's lots of things it displays. As I mentioned earlier, I like to have it displaying the percentage. You use that to scroll through to it. Normally when a car's delivered to you or you're taking it, it will be displaying that screen anyway, but that's where the button is if you want to find it again, or if you're having a little play around. Then beneath it, you've got the bigger cluster of buttons. This is a Tekna model, so it's got a heated steering wheel, as you can see there. It also has heated seats, front and rear. You've got a traction control button, which you generally wouldn't use. You've got a pedestrian warning sound. The Nissan Leaf emits a slightly enhanced sort of electric motor type sound at low speeds to warn pedestrians. It's quite a discreet sound. The Leaf's also a very well made, well insulated car, so it's not something that would be a bother, so that's a button you would never turn off. Next to it is the button that overrides the charging timer I discussed earlier. So if you were charging in the middle of a day but you've got a late night profile set, you press that to override it. Next to it, you've got your locking button for your charging cable when you're plugged in and charging. So for example, if you were charging in a public supermarket, you might choose to press that button to lock the cable in place so no one can unplug you till you're finished charging. And then finally, you've got the important one, which will take me on to my next step. This button that looks like a petrol pump with a lead coming out of it is the button that you use to open the nose of the car, which is where you plug it into charge. So I'll quickly turn the car off. And then we'll open that and we'll go around and we'll show you the charge port. Okay, so the little nose is all open. I always refer to it as the nose or the baby bonnet. But here you go. Obviously, we press the button, that releases it, and there it is. It can also be opened from the key. I tend to, if I'm inside the car, I use the button inside the car, and if I'm outside, I use the one on the key. So the bottom button on the key, give that a press, does exactly the same, releases it and pops it up. And inside here, you'll notice there are two connectors. Not surprisingly, you've got the smaller one, which is the one that you use for charging at home. And then, obviously, again, not surprisingly, the bigger one is what you would use for rapid charging in the motorway. But the little one, this is known as your Type 1 connector. So this is where you plug in at home. Equally, if you're charging, say at a municipal car park or a supermarket, they'll have charging posts which don't charge at a super fast rate, they charge at a slower rate, a bit like you would do at home. You'll bring your own cable that you plug into the charge point, and then that also plugs in there. So yeah, the CHAdeMO port charges the car really, really quickly. Half an hour's worth of charge time on the CHAdeMO will probably deliver about 80 miles worth of extra range to the car, so it's pretty good. So if you're doing a longer drive, with a little bit of planning, it's easy to go as far as you like in a car like this. So those are the two charging sockets. So what I'll do, I'll go into the boot. We've got some charging leads in the boot, so I'll show you the charging leads. All of our cars and every Nissan Leaf, we all supply with a lead that you can plug into your domestic home mains and charge from that. So no charge point is actually required. You've got, if you like, your portable charge point. So what you've got here, you've got a lead, it's got a 13 amp plug on the end, then it's got your type 1 connector on the other end, which goes in the nose of the car in the smaller socket like we described earlier. It's a slower rate of charge than you would say from a car park charge point or a proper home charge point, but seeing as most people are charging overnight and rarely charging from empty to full, it's largely irrelevant. So this comes free with every car. So you've got, when you get home, you've got everything you need, just like your mobile phone. Just find a socket, plug your car in and charge it. There's some kind of useful bits of advice. You know, it's a 13 amp lead, so it can be plugged into any extension reel as long as it's 13 amp rated. The unit itself actually draws 10 amps, but it's over a prolonged period of time, so you still want to be plugged into something at least 13 amps of rating. However, if you're using an extension reel, make sure that extension reel is completely unwound. Other than that, it's just like anything else. You know, you get power to your car like you would do to your electric lawnmower if you're mowing the lawn. The second lead, this is what's known as a type 2 to type 1 lead. Most people don't necessarily need this. This is the lead that you would use if you were charging in a public car park, say your local supermarket or something like that. They have posts into which you need to plug your own lead into. So this end goes into the post, and then again this end goes into the nose of the car. And then when you're finished, you put the lead back in your car. Like I say, most people in our experience don't tend to need this lead because they do very little public charging. But you know, we would advise you accordingly as to whether we think it's advantageous. It might be you just want it because you want to enjoy a bit of extra free public charging, because a lot of supermarket chargers, for example, are all free. Or it might be that you have a charge point at your workplace or something like that where you want to charge, in which case would be useful. Like I say, we give advice. The lead the car comes with is that 13 amp lead that just plugs into a normal main socket. One last thing I'd like to go through is it's a keyless car. There's no key thing on the steering column. The car just needs to be present. The key just needs to be present in the car. Also, you can use the key to lock and unlock the car without actually physically pressing the buttons. Obviously, you've got a lock and an unlock like any, but you've also got these little buttons on the handles. Give it a press, it locks the car. Give it another press, it unlocks the car. So that way you can just have the key in your coat or your handbag or whatever, and you don't need to get it out each time. Well, that's covered the basics of your new Nissan Leaf. Hopefully we've covered everything you need to know, but remember, we're always at the end of the phone or the end of the emails if you have any more questions, be it technical or simple. But for now, enjoy your new Nissan Leaf, and thank you for watching.